You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. I am your host, Summer Gilbert, and I am the Director of Marketing and Branding here at Pacific Companies. And today my co-host is Director of Recruitment, Mr. Marc Scarlata.
Good morning, Summer.
Good morning. Thanks for being on the podcast with me.
Happy to be here.
Today on the podcast, we are honored to have Dr. Mike Lee back here in the studio. Dr. Mike Lee, if you did not hear his Provider's Perspective episode, he is a board-certified family medicine physician, but he also specializes in the discussion of burnout. This is a very serious subject, and it's something that if you're a physician, it's near and dear to your heart, and we've had physicians talk to us about this many times, and so we thought this would be really important to have Dr. Lee come back into the studio and let's open the discussion. So Marc and I were really excited to have him back, and all his feedback and everything he talks about is so important. And so if you know someone dealing with this, or you yourself are, this is the episode for you. So thank you so much for listening. And here's our episode with Dr. Mike Lee. All right. Well, Dr. Lee, thank you for coming back on the Doc Lounge with us.
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. I wasn't sure if you'd want to have me back after that first one.
No, absolutely. We're going to talk about a pretty serious subject today, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people, there's a lot of blogs and things about it out there, but it's a subject that needs to be brought out, and I think it's a little bit more serious than most people think, and that's physician burnout.
Oh, definitely.
So, Dr. Lee, you're really passionate about this subject. Give us a little bit of history on how that passion came about.
Sure. For me, I realized, especially during my med school training, I can tell you that numerous of my colleagues, and including myself actually, had kind of gone through sort of burnout, but we didn't really know what it was. I think sometimes we confused it with just being overly tired or, not feeling sleep deprived. There are different kind of irrational justifications we had for this feeling we had. But what I come to realize that actually I think a lot of us were just burned out. And I remember at the time, one of my colleagues who was really going through a hard time, went to the administration, kind of shared what was going on. And unfortunately, the response was just, you can always delay a year, or here's the number to psychiatry. And I don't think that's at the fault of the administration. I think it's just that sometimes I've realized that we're really good about taking care of patients, and that's kind of the culture that we're trained in, but it wasn't really a lot of how to take care of yourself. No one ever taught us, oh, this is what you need to take care of you. We never had a class on that during med school, or in our training. And so then I realized for me, when I heard that, I was like, that just can't be right. That doesn't sound like it should be appropriate, because we need to take care of each other. We need to take care of ourselves. But we didn't have any guidance on really how to do that well, especially kind of, the attitude was always in our training was to just put your head down and keep going. So if a patient died that you were taking care of and it really affected you emotionally, it was kind of like you're afraid to say anything or show any emotion because it was a sign of weakness, or you would be shamed for doing that. Like, what's wrong with you? You can't handle it? That was kind of the mentality that unfortunately a lot of us were trained in that kind of culture. So then a lot of us were just silently, I realized, just burning out. And so I think my passion came really when I started seeing my friends, and including myself going through it, just realizing that we need to have some help. Like, there has to be resources. There has to be something that we can go to really support us through some of these really hard times in our training and especially in our practice of medicine.
Yeah. If you were to define burnout, how would you define it?
Right. That's a great question, because it's funny. It's really, there's this researcher, Dr. Maslow, who did a whole burnout inventory. So it's kind of an MBI scale that you can take. And what she does is she breaks it down into 3 ways. She says the first component is emotional exhaustion. The second one is depersonalization or cynicism. And the third one is kind of the lack of feeling of personal accomplishment. So I think we can all connect with the emotional exhaustion part. That's just feeling tapped out. You feel like everyone's sucking the life out of you. You're giving up so much of your just care and compassion. They almost call it compassion fatigue, where you're just always giving, but you're not really receiving anything or recharging or reloading that. And then the second part of, kind of depersonalization or cynicism is more, when you meet those colleagues who are just angry when they come to work, they're just upset. You can tell their energy is really negative. They feel like everyone is just a pain. No one's there to help them. It's that surgeon that throws instruments in the OR when they're angry. That's kind of that sort of cynicism and depersonalization. The whole feeling of humanity part of being a doctor is gone, and that when you get to that point, and then the lack of feeling of personal accomplishment is more just you're at that point where you just kind of go through this feeling of like I'm not where I want to be in my life. This is not what I thought I was going to be doing. So when you hit those three components, and I'd say for the research that most doctors, more than half, actually have one of those three components and burnout that they're dealing with or struggling with. It's interesting, they find that for female physicians, it's more the emotional exhaustion that they feel first. For the male physicians, it's more of the depersonalization or cynicism that they feel first. So, when I see and it's funny because, not funny, but it's one of those things where I'll notice in my male colleagues, if I get just this vibe that it's like they're just negative, they just seem really annoyed, irritable, easily irritated. They're the ones that are yelling at their residents or their med students or whatever it is. I'll just kind of approach them and I'll be like, how are you doing? Because most of the time it's really because they're just not in a good place, they're burned out. And then, for your female colleagues, if they just seem really distant or they just seem tired, it's hard, then I kind of get a sense that, hey, there's something deeper going on than just being tired. And so what I tell people is how you gauge it is it's kind of like how you feel before you go on vacation, right? And then you go on vacation, you come back, you feel great, and then 2 days later, you're feeling exactly how you felt before you went on vacation. That's kind of how I tell people. You can kind of gauge it based on that, and that's how you know when you're not in a good place or you're feeling burned out.
And we talked, sorry, Mark, we talked about this misleading approval or about leaders that encourage you or incentivize you for working super hard, right? And it's so misleading because as a leader, you should, this guy works 12-hour days or he's worked 24 hours. He's awesome, and you get praised. That's the word I'm looking for. You get praised for burning yourself out, right? Where it should be more like, hey, that's not right. Like, you need to go home. That makes you're not going to be at your best. And, and I think that's across not just being a physician, that's everywhere. And I think it's such a misconception for bosses and leaders. Well, this person comes in at 6 and leaves at 7. That's not healthy.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, definitely. And I'm sorry, just to kind of on top of that, I think one of the things that leaders should really look at, and actually my mentor, Dr. Pam Hansberger, had taught me, was that leaders should really be looking at vacation time. They should be looking at people's vacation time and being like, wow, this person hasn't taken a vacation in a while, or they've got a lot of built up vacation days. Like, what's going on here? And the other things you can monitor is actually, you can even track how long they're on the computer, how long they're on their on the electronic medical records. And if they're on it after hours for long periods of time, those are the people we need to be proactively, as leaders, reaching out to and saying, hey, what's going on? We noticed you're on the computer a lot at home after hours, and what can we do to help you deal with that or help you get through that day better?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think you maybe just answered my question. Is I was going to ask you that you had realized that during your own time in residency that you had felt this burnout, and that it kind of struck a chord with you, and it became a passion for you. Right. Other than what you just said, is there anything else that if you were a residency director that you could do to help with burnout?
I would definitely say that one thing you can do is actually talk about it. It's one of those things where, and this is what I learned from Dr. Brene Brown, who I've gotten certified and has done a bunch of work on shame and authenticity and vulnerability, is shame doesn't exist when there's empathy. So, that's the antidote to shame. So we could just talk about it and put it out there that, hey, it's going to be normal. Like, you're going to burn out. You're going to have moments in your career where it's going to happen. You'd be surprised at how people like, oh, it's not something I have to be ashamed of, or I have to bottle up or hide it in a closet. Like, we can talk about it and just know that I'm not the only one. Because I think for a lot of the docs, including myself in training, it was like we didn't want to talk about it because we didn't want to admit to it. Because my thinking was, am I the only one? Am I the only one feeling this way? And when you actually can feel open enough to talk about it, if the leaders create a culture where you're open to talk about it without feeling shamed for it, or without feeling, persecuted for feeling this way, then it really becomes something that is more positive than negative. And then, if anything, you get through it faster. I was, one of the ahas I had recently, because, I was treating a patient with like cold sores, and I thought about it and I was like, oh my gosh, like burnout is like a cold sore. It's one of those things where we go in and out of it. I think people think, oh, if you burn out once, it's over, that's it, you won't get it again. But I tell people in our careers, you're going to go through periods of burnout, and it may not necessarily always be work related. Sometimes it's life circumstance. You have a sick parent that's in the hospital, or you've got your home life, or your marriage is falling apart, or you're going through some challenges with your kids and parenting. I mean, there's lots of different things. So I tell people all the time, like, what we have to think about a burnout is not that it's just a one-time thing and you get over it. That you'll go through periods of burnout throughout your career, but like a cold sore, you kind of have to figure out what your medication is going to be, what's your Valtrex or your,
what works for you.
Exactly. It's going to help you to get out of it faster.
So on that note, other than vacation, taking time off, what resources would you suggest if the audiences that was listening to this, some of our physician audience is listening to this, and it strikes a chord with them as well in terms of, hey, I'm having some of these systems, or I know I'm going through a burnout, other than taking time off and going on vacation, which always helps, of course.
Yeah. Sure.
What are some other resources that they could tap into right now to help them?
Right. Well, actually, there's quite a few people that are doing quite a bunch of work on burnout. There's a guy named Dyke Drummond. He's a physician, but he does a ton of work on burnout, so he's got a website out there. And then Pamela Weibel has done a ton of work on physician suicide, so they provide a lot of resources and suggestions and things like that. What I would say is really the first step when I coach, because I actually coach people who go through burnout, and this is what I do for myself when I'm going through it too as well, is I actually have them take a step back, because I think a lot of times when you're going through burnout, your mindset is in a really bad place in the sense of you feel like you have no control. And so, right, yeah, absolutely. And you start to feel, you go into sort of victim mentality. And a lot of times when we go into that victim mode, we feel helpless. So I always ask people when I meet with them is to take a step back and breathe and think about what you can control, what you can't control. Because I think a lot of times when you're going through burnout, you just have the sense that you can't control anything. So instead of being proactive, you become very just reactive. You're just waiting for the next bad thing to drop, and then I think if you have that mindset, it can be, it's really hard, because then you're just in that darkness for a long time. But if you can just take a step back and think, okay, what can I control, what I cannot control, and then those things that I can control, what can I do to make it better? What can I do to get through this? And sometimes if it requires taking some time off from work, if it requires getting a therapist, which I really sincerely believe every physician should have a therapist to kind of help process some of this. But I'll tell people that a lot of times they just think taking time off will help by itself, but I tell them it's going to take more than that. In that time off, you have to be proactive about either getting therapy or getting coaching or something in that time to really help you get through that time and process, and then share it with other people, because it's amazing when you share it with your colleagues that they have great suggestions, or that they just to have someone empathize with you. It is part of the healing process. I think for the ones I worry about the most are the silent sufferers, the ones that aren't telling anybody about what they're going through. But then that's the scary part, is those are the ones that are committing suicide or doing something really, really bad. And so, I mean, to their bodies or to themselves or to their families or whatever it might be. And so it's really tough.
Through your research and work in this particular subject, are there any statistics, Dr. Lee, that says that a certain percentage of the workforce, the physician workforce out there suffers burnout? Is it just rampant? Can we quantify this in any way?
It is definitely rampant. It's out there. In terms of quantifying, it's really hard. We just think that there are more, as the data shows, there's more than half of physicians do suffer some component of burnout. So it's definitely more than half now. And I do think that and actually the other statistic that comes out is that female physicians are more prone to burnout than male physicians are. And that is interesting. And I think there's a lot of factors to that contribute. Part of it is, I think that a lot of the domestic pressures do fall on the women more than the men oftentimes. And then also too, I do think that patients have different expectations from the female physicians and the male ones. I think it's interesting when I see an ankle sprain, it often is just an ankle sprain. It's just they're here, of this ankle sprain. When my female colleague sees an ankle sprain, it's that on top of my husband's leaving me, and it's crazy. If I have like 1 or 2 patients cry on me in a week, that's like a bad week. My female colleagues are like, hey man, it's like half my patients in a morning are crying on me, or going through some hard stuff, and it's just a different. And so I can't imagine how exhausting that's got to be, if I had to deal with that. So I definitely think that there are different expectations that are put on our female physician colleagues, and that's why I think it's really important that we are able to recognize that and find some better ways to support that practice if we can for our female colleagues, especially. Yeah, in that way. Yeah.
We have heard stories from family medicine physicians that when they are seeing patients, more and more and more of these patients are requiring some type of mental health. And they're having to wear 2 hats. I mean, I know as a family physician, you wear a lot of hats. But if you just generalized it, I have to be a family medicine physician and figure out all of their issues, whatever that might be. And then I have to be a therapist.
Right.
On top of it. And I'm assuming that can be taxing because it's double the amount of work.
Right, absolutely, especially in requirements of time.
Right.
The time factor is always hard.
You've got to see 20, 25 patients, whatever it is, per day. You've got to get these people moving. At the same time, you don't want to seem like you're rude or you're hurrying them. You're giving them the time that they're looking for.
Absolutely, and then I think part of that challenge too comes in that now there's patient satisfaction scores. So now you've got to deal with that component, because for some companies or some organizations, you have to meet a certain metric or score to become a partner or to get a financial reward or something like that. So I think definitely those are some of the challenges as well, because and I think at the core of every physician, they want to be able to meet the needs of the patients. They do, but it is definitely hard when you're quantified by a time. You've got this much time scheduled, and then the patients get upset because you're running late, or this and that, or late than that what they expected. So I think that's always even more challenging in that way too.
Is there any, like in big medical centers, I know they usually have a psychiatrist or psychologist on call for when someone loses a loved one, or do they have anything like that for physicians?
That's a great question. They actually do. I know that at least, when I was at Kaiser Permanente, they did, which was great. The challenge, I'll be honest with you though, is getting physicians to actually make that call. Right. Absolutely. It's that negative stigmatism. Yeah. And that negative stigma that comes with, dealing with asking for help, because I can't tell you. We always joke around. We say, how many of us in med school were taught to ask for help? It was not there. If you asked for help, it was a sign of you didn't know. Weakness. Right. They're like, you can't handle it. So that was kind of the culture and I believe it's really different now. I believe that the med schools and the education and the residency programs are definitely, because of all the talk about burnout and because it's out there, they're shifting that culture, but it's still there, definitely. And I think especially for the older generation doctors, even if you put it as a resource, it's hard for them to actually reach out. So what's nice is actually sometimes it's if you can create a system where it's automatic, where if you're going through something, it's automatic, someone's going to reach out to you. And so that's the nice thing. I know that definitely here at Kaiser at Orange County, they have a system like that, where if the doctor's going through something, it's almost they try to make it as automatic as possible, where you'll ask for help. And most of the time, we appreciate it. We really do. We appreciate it, because we sometimes don't have the courage or the strength to actually do that or to reach out. So when someone reaches out to us, it's actually nice, and we receive it most of the time pretty well. Yeah.
And I kind of get, like, my husband's a firefighter paramedic, and I mean, he sees some horrible things, and sometimes he'll come home and he's just quiet, and I'll be like, do you want to talk about it? And there's a lot of times that he doesn't, because he doesn't want to, because I'm not in the, medical field. He doesn't want to share with me that, he saw this girl my age opening her door on the side of the street in a car, and he's picking her up off the pavement, and like the stuff that he sees is unreal.
Oh my gosh, it's gotta be so traumatic.
Yeah. And so a lot of times it doesn't even matter if I want to hear it or not. A lot of times I let it get it up to him, but I don't just ask him and then stop. I'll make sure to do what I can to make sure that he has the right outlet to because I mean, just like doctors, you guys see really intense things that the normal person isn't used to seeing.
Right, right. Absolutely. And this is why there was, there's so much when you think about physicians and dealing with some substance abuse, whether it be alcoholism or depression and anxiety, there's a lot, there's definitely some of that too as well within our field because we don't have an outlet, and so sometimes it's easier just for us to numb it with, I mean, this isn't just for physicians, but everyone. We numb, and this is what I learned from Brene Brown was that you just numb it with these substances, whether it be alcohol or gambling, drugs, whatever it might be.
Which is a whole separate issue on top of it.
Right, exactly. And I think some, like with firefighters, it's interesting. One of my colleagues who's a psychiatrist, Dr. Neil Doshi, taught was that, for some of them, I know when they go through something hard, they actually they're forced, not forced, but it is part of their response that they go see a therapist and then they get cleared.
Exactly.
Right, to go back. And I think that's fantastic. We don't have anything like that.
I think that should be mandatory in medicine.
Absolutely. I mean, it's crazy when you think about a trauma surgeon who goes and does a trauma, loses a patient on the table, and then has to walk out the door and do another surgery within the next 30 minutes. I mean, that's insane.
Or an ER doc.
Right. Absolutely right.
They see bad stuff too.
They see tons of bad stuff, and then they have to go back. And I mean, you wonder why there's a high rate of burnout in ER medicine. For that, it's like no. And how often does someone just check in with them to say, hey man, I just saw that kid that you tried to save and coded passed, how are you doing? Are you, and we want you to see someone, to have someone be able to talk them through it. But it's not that. It's like you just got to put your head down and keep going and see another patient. And so
compartmentalize.
Exactly. It'd be great if we could find some way, because I think sometimes we forget that we're just as human as our patients are, and it's almost like we have this sort of there's this old school mentality that we're supposed to be superhuman or super people, and we're human just like anyone else. We have our own emotions. We have our own family issues. It's interesting. I think oftentimes my patients think I have this perfect life. Like that all doctors, you make good money, you all have your BMWs, your Benzes, and you have good families. But I it's oftentimes I have to remind patients that we're just as human as you are. We have our marital issues, we have our issues, we have our
financial. That you come out with a bunch of debt.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh, some of my colleagues have $300,000 or $400,000 in debt.
Just that stress on your back all the time, on top of everything else.
It is. It's a huge stressor to have to pay those loans back for sure at the same time. Definitely.
As recruiters, we talk to physicians all the time that have student loans, and I'm working with an OBGYN right now, $600,000. Okay, and when she talks about it, to your point, Summer, I can hear the stress in her voice.
Yes.
It's a monkey on her back. She's carrying a big backpack of $600,000, right? And she's trying to lighten that load.
Right.
I can hear it. So I guess there's a lot from this conversation that we've learned that can go into burnout, and it all makes sense. And you've got some solutions for people listening to this. What about you yourself? Did you mention that you've done some training? Do you personally work and help, and can people reach out to you, or is that not part of your program?
I mean, I can tell you it was interesting when I was working at Kaiser Permanente. I was actually a communications coach. So, physicians who might have been struggling with their satisfaction scores or just having a hard time connecting with their patients. And oftentimes when I would meet with them, it was interesting because I found they were fine. They were actually really good communicators and they connected well, but they were burned out. So, part of that position, instead of being a communications coach, a lot of it was actually being almost like a therapist. So that kind of helped me develop those skills of how to support. And oftentimes I think people just need to be reminded that they're a good doctor. That, I think one of the biggest themes that I've learned from doing some of the coaching regarding burnout is really just around self-compassion. I think what has driven a lot of us into this career is that sort of beating up on ourselves. I have to be hard on myself. I have to keep going. And Dr. Kristen Neff, who's written a couple books on self-compassion, has done a ton of research on it. The research shows clearly that when you have that sort of self-deprecating, self-critical mindset, it only leads to depression, anxiety, because there's no end to it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you go to one point and then there's no end to that. And so really, a lot of the work that I've been doing on myself and for some of my colleagues is around self-compassion. So just learning, how do I talk to myself as I would talk to my best friend? Because, at the end of the day, if you talk to your best friend like you talk to yourself, you'd have no friends. You know what I mean? Think about how many times you trash down yourself. God, I suck. Like, I'm a terrible parent. I'm a terrible spouse. Like, what was I thinking? I'm so stupid. How many of these negative comments do we say about ourselves on a regular basis? And I think really learning how to kind of take a step back from that and shifting it to more of, how do I become more compassionate towards myself? So when, if your colleague was going through a marital issue, if your colleague was going through depression, what would you say? You'd say, go see a therapist, go get help. But then at the same time, you're going through the same thing and you're not doing it, so.
As I say, not as I do.
Right, absolutely, right? And so, so I think we have to, so self-compassion has been my big thing. Because, I think a lot of people will lean out to, like, they'll say exercise, plant-based diets, things like that. And I always joke around, I'm like, for some people, including myself, exercise stresses me out sometimes, or it's not the cure. It may be what works for you. But I tell people, before we go there, we really have to think about, my first piece is, how do I find ways of being compassionate towards myself so that actually then I'll be more proactive about wanting to take care of myself too as well. And it's hard when you're coming from a culture which is very sacrificial. It's always about giving, but not really learning about, how do I care for myself? Because, it's like when you ever do anything nice for yourself, what do you feel? It's oftentimes that self-imposed guilt. Yeah. Like, I should be really spending time with my parents, or I should be doing this, or, all these things. But being able to, how do we work towards being able to let that go and see that I have to take care of myself first before I care for other people. Yeah.
And I think as physicians, you guys have to have each other's backs. And that's the biggest thing, is to, when you see someone and you have that instinct that they could be struggling or having a bad day, or just being that person, to lend a hand or lend an ear, or, and if they say, not be afraid to go back, because most people will say no the first time, and because how much regret are you going to have when you get the call that they just, took their life? Right. And there's so much regret of, oh my gosh, I could have just, took that 5 minutes to go back again and really try. And it's just, especially you physicians, what each other goes through. Mm-hmm. So who better to be like, hey, I understand. Just let's talk about it. What can I do? And not be afraid to do that.
Right. And be okay with being vulnerable and authentic, in the sense of saying, just like, hey, I've been through it too. Like, I burn out too, like, I've gone through it. And, and to be able to say that it, just to remind them that they're not alone, and no, but I appreciate you saying that, because that's so important. A lot of times I find that the issue that we struggle with reaching out with colleagues is when we don't know an answer, we don't want to say anything. I think we don't have a solution, we want to just keep our mouth shut. But what we don't forget is that part of the solution, and part of that is just listening and just caring for. So I would suggest for every physician, if they notice something's changed in their colleague, or they're worried about someone, that, you may not have their fix, you may not know what's going to help them get out of it, but it means a lot to someone, and it's part of helping them. It's just by sitting and saying, hey, I care about you, I've noticed something's different, I wanted to check in and make sure you're that things are okay, and then just go from there. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that for people, and even though I didn't know exactly what was going on, or even though I didn't have a solution for them, just for me being able to sit and listen and hear them about how bad their day was, how things are going on, how rough their marriage is going through, just to hear them out, and just to be able to say, like, oh my gosh, like, I can't imagine how hard. Yeah, I think a lot of times people know what to do. They just want someone to listen and hear them out first. Yeah. It's kind of one of those things I joke around, because I do a lot of coaching around empathic communication, and I say it's kind of like when you come home from a bad day and you're venting to your spouse, my day was terrible. I think the last thing a lot of us want to hear is, well, did you do this? Did you ask that? Why don't you quit? Why don't, getting solutions, because that's not helpful. You just want to smack the other person at that point, right? It's funny. And so I joke around, not to genderize it, but oftentimes it's the men, right? Because we're fixers. But what I say sometimes is, sometimes part of the fixing and part of that healing part is really just listening and saying, that sucks. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine how hard that must be. And just to hear someone out, it's amazing how healing that can be for people.
And I feel, and just from personal experience, I know mostly if something's going on and someone asks me, do you want to talk about it? My instinct usually is like, no, because you're like, oh, they're just asking to be nice, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I almost feel like there's like a rule of three in it, like, because you can't just say, you know, well, I tried, I reached out once, you know, and they didn't want to talk. But it's always the first time you reach out, that's when they're kind of like, I'm not sure if I want to bring this up. And then you come back again, you know, just in a compassionate way and try again. And maybe at least always tell yourself, like, give yourself that, like, you know, 3 times, I'm going to really try. And if they don't, then I'm not, you know, bug them. But I feel like it's worth not just being like, well, I asked them once and they didn't want to talk to me. Right. Because I think in society, a lot of times you almost just naturally feel like that's what you need to do. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, like, yeah, I should probably go ask. But, oh, well, I asked. Right. You didn't want to talk to me. Right. And it's deeper than that. Right. And I think if you really do care, it's being consistent and going back again.
Right. No, I like that. I like that a lot, because I think our first reaction when someone asks is like, I'm fine. You know, like that is, it's like, I'm fine, even though inside you're dying, you know, like, I think that's our first response, like, I'm fine. And I appreciate you saying that. And I think the other thing to consider is also the time that you do it, because if you're doing it in between patients or when it's crazy, of course, they're not going to be able to open up. But if you can find a time in the day during lunch maybe, or after work, you know, whatever it might be, to be able just to have that moment. I think I love your suggestion. I think that rule of 3 is fantastic to be able to do it at that point.
And approach. Time and approach come from a non-judgmental, open, you know, guard down.
Definitely. Because what I'll tell people is sometimes just going in and actually being a little vulnerable on yourself. So what I'll do is I'll go in and be like, oh my gosh, this week has been so painful. We got so many of these, you know, these patients coming in like really stressed out that I've been seeing. It's been exhausting. How are you dealing with it? You know, so it's kind of like I'll kind of open up a little bit, and then it makes them be like, oh, me too. Like, right, exactly. And then just kind of allowing that window to be open, because I think when you're willing to do that, then it actually does that. Then it makes them realize that there's no ulterior motive to find out. Because what I'll tell you is I think this is the hardest thing about leaders and being in leadership is oftentimes because they know you're a leader and because you have a title, it does change the dynamic a lot. So as a leader, you know, I think for a lot of us, if my leader comes and asks me, I don't want to say that I'm struggling, because I don't want them to be like, oh, we got to look out for that doctor. Like, you know, is he a right fit for this group? Or, you know what I mean? We're afraid we're going to be judged or criticized in some way for showing some of that vulnerability. So I believe that I think it is hard for a leader in that way, but that's where I think your rule of 3 is great, because I think a lot of times as leaders, we just ask one time and we think, okay, they're fine. Yep. But I love your rule of 3, because I think especially if you have a leadership title or in leadership, I think that's where just coming around the second or third time really shows that doctor that you really care and that you really want to know.
And we learned last time that you're going to start this new exciting opportunity here in the next couple of weeks or so. Right. And I believe that you're going to be have a medical director title.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So is that how you're going to institute different types of opportunities for physicians to come and talk to you? Or what are you going to do specifically to try to help them to try to reduce burnout for your own employees?
Sure. No, that's a great question. It's really exciting. I feel so privileged. I'll be joining a group called One Medical, and they're just going to be opening up clinics here in Orange County soon in a few months, and I'll be the district medical director there. And one of the reasons why I really was interested in this group and really I was attracted to them is because they are big believers in physician and provider wellness. So that was really attractive for me. And so that's one of the things that they really push for is how do we make it better for the providers to provide excellent care for primary care for their patients.
So excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Does One Medical then, based upon what you just said, have certain policies, procedures in place already that you're going to be able to bring to your employees?
Right, definitely. And that's the nice thing is it's already kind of part of their culture. So that's the one thing. And then for me to add on to that is what I'm excited about. So even though they have those policies and procedures, I think a lot of it is up to the leadership to create the culture. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm excited about is with what I know now and the experiences I've had, I'll be able to create a culture among the providers to be open, to be able to, among the physicians to be able to share and, and really, and I always try to, and whenever I lead teams, I always do my best right at the outset to say, hey, I want you to know we're in this together, that, we're all playing equally very important roles in providing care, and that, I want us to be, I want you to know that we're here to support, and that I always try to make myself vulnerable first, in the sense of just being able to share that, hey, I can tell you that some of us are going to go through some hard times, and I want you to know that we're here for each other, and make it out that way. I think the one thing that they don't do well in medical school sometimes is they don't tell you you're going to have you're going to have hard patient encounters. You're going to have, I think a lot of us come out of med school and we think, oh gosh, every patient's going to love me and they're going to want to hug me, and, I'll fix all their problems and I'll be super doctor. I think a lot of us have these sort of ideal things, but no one ever tells you, hey, you're going to get sued. It's going to happen. Like, you're going to get sued. There are going to be times when you're going to maybe make some errors and you're going to just really struggle with that. There are going to be times when patients are going to die that you're operating on. There are going to be, things like that. And I think sometimes I wish they would tell you these things, or there are going to be times when patients are going to yell at you. They're going to tell you you're the worst doctor ever. Like, it's going to happen. And I feel like we have to do better about when they happen. This is what you have to remember. You have to remember that a lot of times, not to take it too personally, to remember that, you are a good doctor, you're doing your best. And what we call, and part of, I think, where it goes to burnout is that negativity bias. It's that sort of, it's always, we stick onto the negatives more than the positives, right?
Yeah.
My job here, I could describe it as stressful, because it is, okay? But my decisions that I make are not life and death. Okay? I can't screw up a medication. I can't do an operation wrong. I can't make medical errors. Okay? But nonetheless, in any job, I think in today's society, we're super stressed. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is an app out there that I recommend to anybody and everybody. It's called Calm.
Oh yeah, I have it actually on my phone.
I've seen the ad for it come up on my phone. So, I do not have it.
Tamara Levitt is the creator of the Calm app. And she and I connect on social media every now and again. She's a super great lady. But that Calm app, she records 365 daily, I don't know if you want to call them affirmations, or giving you information on meditation and living a calmer life. The one that I just listened to, and I listen to it as I drive into work, and it kind of grounds me a little bit. You can have some nice music play in the background, and then she does a quick meditation with you. Close your eyes, sit down, cross your legs. Can't do that while I'm driving, of course. Yeah. So she kind of calms you down a little bit, and then she has every single day a different subject that she wants to talk to you about, to give you a different view of anything to do with meditation. Yesterday's was about self-compassion.
I love it.
Okay? Love it. We have a tendency to beat ourselves up. We're our own worst enemies. We're our biggest critics.
Absolutely.
Okay? Think about the stress that puts on yourself outside of whatever else is going on in your life. Just that thinking.
Right.
And it's this type of stuff that, even though it might be right in front of my face, it's eye-opening. And it makes me feel better. And it's every single day. And I don't do it every single day, but just every now and again, if I just want to, I've had a busy morning, I've got to drop the kids off, I'm running late, whatever the case might be, I want Tamara to calm me down. And it doesn't matter what her subject matter is. I always feel better and grounded and calmer when I get here.
Right. That's great.
So and that's something that anybody could use at any time. It's in their pocket.
Right. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time, right?
No, it's her. That's the other thing. That's a good point, Dr. Lee. I think it's 10 minutes total.
Right.
Her talk.
Right.
on whatever subject matter it is.
I think that's great. And I think those are, I mean, just finding those, whatever it might be for you, you know, whether it's that, some people might be listening to classical music in the morning, or, you know, some people, right, going for a run is huge for some people. For me, my spiritual life is really important so taking that time in the morning to pray, you know, that is my sort of like kind of reset the day and sort of get refocused. But, you know, whatever it is for everyone, it's interesting. There's something, I learned about something called tactical pause, you know, and I think one of the things that we don't do well is we don't pause in our days. You know, if you think about your day, you run, you're like running, seeing patients. Then you got to go pick up the kids. Then you got to go make dinner. Then you got to go do these things. And it's like, how many, and you know, one of the things that I thought was interesting was that someone taught me was that you have to actually intentionally take a pause in between things just to reset, which was and it's not like a 20-minute thing. It's more just like a quick 2-minute, 1 minute, whatever it is, but just to take a minute to pause.
Stop and snow.
Right. And then reset and then go to your next activities. Absolutely. I mean, and when I learned that, it's if I had a bad day at work, one of the things that I've actually been better at is before I even pull into my driveway now, if I'm feeling that negative energy still from work or that stress, I actually will just take a minute, pull off to the side, you know, maybe a block before my house, and just turn on some music or just take a minute, decompress for like 2 or 3 minutes, and just take some deep breaths. And it's amazing how that is. And that same thing goes actually between patients. So if I just had a patient yell at me for some reason or was really upset at me or the system or the appointment, I'll go into my office literally before I go into the next room to see the next patient and just take 2 or 3 minutes to breathe, throw my keyboard across the room. I'm just joking, but you know, I think but like whatever it might be, just to take a minute and take that tactical pause before I reset and go into my next appointment. And I found that that's helped me a lot too as well.
I think a lot of people are reactionary, and I'm such a big component on you are in control. You have the ultimate control of how, kind of how you feel or how you let yourself feel, right? Feelings kind of come natural. Sometimes you can't help that something made you feel sad or whatever, but you have the ultimate control on how you let it affect you and how you act and how you react. And, you know, if you come home without taking that moment and your wife says something that upsets you, and then you say something back, and it's
reactionary, like you said.
Totally reactionary, and it just makes everything spiral out. And so just taking those 5 minutes could have just completely helped your entire night. Right. And it's just at getting grounded again and reminding yourself it's going to be okay.
Right, totally. No, and I think that's exactly it. And knowing actually what your limits are, you know, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that kind of one of the things that I've found that has helped me a lot, and that I coach when I work with physicians who are burned out, is how to set boundaries. I think we are terrible at setting boundaries. You know, nobody ever taught us to say no. It was always, we're trained in a yes culture, you know, yes to this, yes to that. And then all of a sudden you go out there and you realize like people just keep asking for things, and you just feel this need to always have to please people, you know. So especially if you're a people pleaser, it's really hard because you don't want to disappoint anyone, and really it is such a hard thing because you are tapped out, and when that comes to that, and not knowing how to say no to things. So especially I think for a lot of us in medicine, we struggle with this sort of self-worth identity. So you know, whenever your leadership asks you to do anything, you always want to say yes, because number one, you may have some FOMO, like, oh, if I don't say yes to this, I might miss out on another opportunity to make my leaders happy or to see that I have potential. And then the other part is wanting to just feel like, oh wow, you know, if I keep saying yes to taking on these more and more responsibilities, it gives me a feeling of self-importance, but it's killing me inside, you know. And how many times do we say yes to something, and while we're doing, we're like, oh, I hate them so much, I just want them to die, you know, like you're like, why, like, how dare they ask me to do this? Don't they know how busy I am? But you know, we don't realize the fault is actually myself, that I said yes to something when inside I wanted to say no. So you know, it's funny, Brene Brown says this. She says she has a ring on her finger, and she says that before she answers with anything, she twirls it around a few times, and she says, do I choose discomfort or, you know, do I choose resentment? And I thought that was really interesting, because it's discomfort versus resentment. So I love this quote by Stephen Covey, which really sits with me. He says, instead of prioritizing your schedule your priorities. And it really hit me, because how many of us think about what's important to me? Am I spending this time with things that I really want to be doing, or that I really are important to me? Or am I just doing it because I just had said yes to something that's not that important to me? Correct. So now, before someone asks me to do something, Mike, do you want to be part of this committee? Do you want to do that? Do you want to do this? I'm trying to get better, because my wife will tell you I'm terrible at boundaries. She'll be like, Mike, you're too much of a yes guy. And I'm like, I know. And that's one thing I'm trying to get better at, is just asking myself, okay, is this something? Because if I say yes to this, I'm going to have to realize I'm going to have to say no to something else. So am I going to say yes to this that's not that important to me, but then end up saying no to something that is actually really important to me? So that's one thing I think people should be thinking about in that way, is just knowing how to set those boundaries and how to say no. But you can say no in a very empathetic and kind and compassionate way.
And a big part of this, the majority of us here in the U.S. are employees, right? And so the leaders that are listening, I think they sometimes get tunnel vision, and these employees are workhorses. They're here to work, and if you have a burnt out employee, that's going to affect your business, going to affect your hospital. And so for those hospital administrators that are listening, and those leaders, what advice would you tell them?
Sure. No, I think thank you for asking. I think it's a great question, because what we find is actually, I would say, and it's Shanafelt, who's done a ton of work. He does the Stanford program for physician wellness. But one of the things that he found was that when leaders are burned out, there's a higher rate that the people under them are burned out. So I would say to those leaders, check yourself first, because you yourself might even be burned out, or and you're just, unfortunately, that negative energy is coming down. So I would say, what kind of culture are you creating? I think as leaders, we have to realize, if we're sending out emails at 2 a.m, what is that saying to the people that we're leading? If we can't even set good boundaries for ourselves, so I would say that. And then I think that the hard part is, unfortunately, when people get into leadership, they get fixed on the metrics. And so all they're seeing is the short term, but they're not seeing the long term. So sure, you're right. That physician, at the end of the day, you can find another physician if that physician leaves or is burnt out, but you don't see the long-term costs of that, what that does to the organization, to the morale of their colleagues and things like that. So what I would say is, if a physician comes to you and says, hey, I need some time off, this has been going on, to figure out a way to make it happen. Because in the long term, if I can keep that physician working with my group, I would say, let's do what we can to make that happen, instead of having to think, that physician's replaceable. And I think, unfortunately, it's hard, because with the workhorse attitude, and I think some hospital administrators do feel this way, because I've heard this from some of them, is that physicians are replaceable. If that person doesn't do well, I can find another one, no problem. And I tell them, you know what, they are not looking at the long term, they're just seeing the short term. But actually, the cost of losing a doctor, to have to retrain somebody, to have to go through all that, is much higher. And then the psychological cost and the carnage that leaves behind, not only for that doctor, but also their colleagues, because they're like, wow, my leadership, my leadership didn't even care for my colleague, or they don't realize what that does for the morale of the group as well. Yeah. So, I think leaders really have to look at the big picture, instead of just seeing what's my quarterly, what are my quarterly metrics going to look like? What is this going to be? Yeah. I think that they have to see that that's what really will get people to stay. Because I found that the leaders who really care and who really will kind of invest in the people that they are leading, they're the ones that are the most sticky, because people are not loyal to an organization, quote unquote, they're loyal to people. So I think that if your leader shows, and who are we loyal to? We're loyal to people who we think really genuinely care about us and invest in us. So I think if you can build that kind of culture, I really believe that actually will create more stickiness.
And I think a lot of times people, like at a previous job, we said we have these core values, right? And like, even how, like, we have here, they were written on the wall, but it was just for show. No one's living those core values. The leaders weren't. And it's just, they expect everyone else to live by these core values and do it. And it's supposed to be the big part, and it's on the, but they're not showing each individual employee as leaders, that core value, like that they really, really care about their employees. And I think, beyond even saying you have core values, you just need to really internally have them, like yourself, and not just do it to say that your company has them. I think that's a big thing these days. They just want to, you know.
Right. It's kind of like, what's the catch term, you know, out there now. And it's kind of rad. No, I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's so true. And that's where I think culture is such a huge thing. I'm really big on culture. So actually I do leadership coaching as well as I've coached other leaders. And one of the things that I always say is you have to be consistent with your values and the values of the company. So your actions, the decisions you make, I always tell people it sets precedence that other people are watching you as a leader. So if you're making a value-based decision, that makes sure it's consistent and make sure it's with that, because where trust is broken is when people are inconsistent. You know, trust is broken when they're like, I don't know, like they did this for that person, but then they did something else for another person that was not consistent with the values of the company or the values or who I thought that person was. But, you know, if it's consistency and you really are pushing that. So I've had friends who have been very bold and courageous leaders where they had to make hard decisions of letting someone go because that person's actions were not consistent with the values of the company. But, and initially I can tell you my friends who were those leaders that I've coached were initially scared. They're worried that, oh, if I let this person go, like, I don't know what that's going to do to the morale. But surprisingly, they found the opposite. They found actually it strengthened the morale because people were like, later on, people were like, oh my gosh, that person definitely was not acting in the way that's consistent with our company's culture. And you know, a lot of people like, you know, it's always after that person goes, the stuff comes out of the woodworks, right? And so, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that more than the opposite, that, you know, and I think a lot of that is really important.
And our leaders here, it's always known they hire and fire
on the core values.
Yeah, no, it's that important to them.
That's great. I mean, that's huge, and that builds trust within the organization. And definitely that trust. I always tell people trust is so key. And whenever I've seen organizations break down or things get really negative in the morale and the culture, it's because there's no trust within the group. And I think that's where, and that's up to the leadership. I think because everyone models after the leaders. So the leaders, I think they will often blame the people they're leading, but I tell them, like, look at yourselves first. Like you got to make sure you're role modeling it and you're emphasizing it and you're talking about it, and it's constantly being said, and not just said, but like you said earlier, to actually be practiced by them. Correct. And then definitely it's going to be important for sure. So if I say I'm going to support physicians, I'm going to support physician wellness or provider wellness, like your values and your actions should be very consistent with that.
And my last question to wrap this up, so we're giving advice for those administrators and stuff. So now what advice do you have for the coworkers? What to do, what to notice, first of all, you know, and how to handle the situation if you notice someone else has burnout.
Right. No, I appreciate you asking that. And I would say if you notice a colleague next to you or people you're working with, they just, you know, for the men, like I said, depersonalization is the first thing to come up. So if they seem like they're just more angry, they're complaining more, they just don't seem to be happy with anyone's performance, their nurses, anything like that, to really reach out to them, just ask them, hey, how are you doing? How are things at home? You know, grab lunch together. Hey, do you have time for lunch? Do you have time for, coffee, whatever it might be? But make that extra effort to reach out to them. And then for our female colleagues, you can just tell they just feel overwhelmed. They're getting pulled at home with their kids, getting pulled at work with all their patients and the load. And just if I would say trust your gut feeling. If you're sensing something's going on with your colleague, it's okay. It's, to just be able to reach out and just say, hey, I just want you to know, like, I'm here, I care about you, I just want to make sure you're doing okay. Like I definitely am struggling myself, what kind of, and I always twist it around that whole reverse psychology thing. I say, like, how do you get through it? Like, what do you do to get through your day better? And kind of open that door. Because I think a lot of times people, again, going back to the shame part of it, they feel like I shouldn't be complaining. I should, we have this sort of mentality, like I should appreciate where I'm at. We're always taught that, right? Like you should appreciate what you have and this and that. But at the same time, when someone is able to just be vulnerable a little bit, it helps us to be more vulnerable too. And then I think more than anything else, just to know if someone cares about you. Because I think the silent sufferers, I would tell the leaders that too as well. It's not the ones that are out there, they always say like the ones that have the loudest voice are the ones that speak out more. It's actually your quiet ones. Reach out to them and just ask them, how are they? And they might be fine, but that's great. great, but they may not be. But just, make an effort to, because we spend so much time on that small group of people who are the loudest ones, that make the most noise, but we don't do enough to really think about, because we think they're fine. They're performing fine. Their metrics are good. Hell, what? They're fine. Yeah. We make up those assumptions, but sometimes like we were talking earlier, the ones that don't take vacation, the ones that are there, the ones that have high satisfaction scores, those are the ones I worry about. Why are their satisfaction scores so high? You know what I mean? Like, do they not have boundaries? Do they not, are they not doing, able to say no to their patients, or be able to, make some boundaries around time with how much appointment time they get? Or the ones that are in the clinic, you hear about, their nurses are complaining because they're in clinic 1 or 2 hours after they're supposed to be. Those are the ones I'd be actively reaching out to, even though their metrics look great. There's always a story behind every metric. Yeah. So I try to tell the leaders that be careful to just throw metrics out at people without any context, because people will make up stories about those metrics that are often negative and not positive. And then the other thing I would say is really about the negativity bias. If you're going through a hard time, if you're getting a lawsuit, if you just got a member complaint, like a patient complained about you, or if something negative happened, what I need you to do is I need you to save every thank you card. I need you to save every email that a patient sent you that is, you changed my life, you did so good. Because it takes, I think they actually did study this, it takes like 5 positives to check out a negative. I mean, that's how strong the negativity bias is. Yeah. So a lot of times what we do is we take thank you cards, we do things like that, and we just toss them out to the side without really letting it sink in, to be like, wow, I got to play a role. Because one thing I realize we don't do enough in medicine is we just think it's part of our job. And that I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. But how many times do we say that to patients? And instead of, we should be like, thank you for letting me be part of this, part of saving, being part of your journey, and being able to play a role in saving your life, and sharing that joy and gratitude with them, and it's okay to high five ourselves once in a while, to be like, I did good today, and self-compassion and self-appreciation, right? Self-appreciation. And it's not arrogance. It's not any of that. It's just more of, it's okay to just take the moment and just, be happy with it and let it sit.
It feels good when you kick ass.
Exactly. Because I can tell you much more. We criticize ourselves all the time. You know what I mean? So definitely that is one of the challenges for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking about this topic. I know it needs to be talked about, and I think more so actually with those leaderships and those hospital administrators. And you made a great point. Like I totally forgot that in the fire department, they make them, like, after they do have a trauma or they see something like that, they have to get cleared, by the, I don't know if it's a psychologist or psychiatrist, but they have to get cleared. And why the heck would you not have that in your hospital? I feel like that's so important. And that's something that probably should be, reconsidered or looked at. Yeah. So
we truly appreciate all of the insight and your incredible passion for this particular subject, physician burnout. And I think we talked about a lot of resources and a lot of things that people who are listening to this can use to help them when they're feeling some burnout.
Definitely. And like I said, great resources are, if you look at like Drummond, he has a website, I think it's called The Happy MD. You've got Pamela Weibel, she has a bunch of stuff on Facebook and she's out there. And then Brene Brown is just, I'm one of her biggest fans. She's got a ton of stuff that I felt like was really applicable to physicians. And then Kristen Neff is the one that's done books on self-compassion. I highly recommend those books too as well. And then just going back to I think what you'd raised earlier, the mindfulness stuff with that app Calm, and being present. And actually, if anything, what we don't do good enough is we don't listen to our bodies. Right. We don't listen to our bodies. And I think we have to get better at listening to our minds and our bodies. I think
that's where your Stephen Covey example comes in.
Exactly. And just, I think what therapists taught me, it's called tracking, where we don't do enough to listen. If my heart's beating faster, if my stomach's upset, if I'm having headaches a lot, I got to listen to my body and realize something's wrong. Like something's not right. And what is that? We don't do enough of that.
And one thing I'm surprised I didn't mention, and this is something that works for me really well, is find the humor if you can. Laughing is so important. And if someone cuts me off, or if someone's being mean, or being a jackass, whatever, I laugh at it almost it's not like I'm judging them, but I try to find the humor in situations instead of getting upset.
Right.
It's a good reaction.
And that works really well for me.
I wish I could do that.
And you know what I mean? And so like whatever you find, if it's the Calm app, learning to find that humor, and because you only live once. And there's everyone's different, and you just can't let try not to let everything affect you. Reach out, get help. It's okay. Right. It's healthy, and there's just this stupid societal stigma about therapy and therapists, and that needs to change. And I'll link all of the information that you shared for the resources and in the Calm app and all of that under the description, and then your contact information as well. Please. So if anyone wants to get a hold of you. Yes. But thank you again. We really appreciate all your time. Thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And a big thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast could not be possible. If you would like to be a guest, go to www.pacificcompanies.com. Thank you.